Okay, so next up here, we're going to continue on with uh, our discussion of level two, conventional morality, and begin looking now at stage four, which is sometimes referred to as societal conformity. So stage four, in fact, is, I mentioned that just to back up here, level two is the most common form, or level, sorry, of moral reasoning that individuals attain. Kind of on a global scale, or at least according to Lawrence Kohlberg in the 1970s. And stage four is probably the most common form of moral reasoning within that level. So societal conformity is a stage of moral reasoning where the main focus is actually on the society itself. And just to connect back with Mead, um, the focus would be on the generalized other here. So as opposed to just the significant other being those who we have the closest and most extensive contact with early on in life. Now we start to see a more general focus on those kind of others in society that occupy the kind of various social roles that make up society. So we start to see a focus here on not just the family, but kind of all the other members of our immediate community and even wider community, and potentially even a global community. This stage of moral reasoning involves a respect for fixed rules and laws and properly constituted authority, meaning that people generally follow the rules. I have a photo here of, this iconic photo of the members of the Beatles walking across a crosswalk. This was the cover for their Abbey Road album. And this is a widely kind of shared photo and popular photo, but it shows, very on a very kind of basic level, it shows conventional morality and specifically societal conformity, because these young men at the time are using the crosswalk. They're walking across the street in a societally appropriate way, meaning that they're following the legal norms of that given society. If they were walking outside of a crosswalk, it'd be a different story. If we had a little more information that showed that they were walking in the crosswalk outside of the designated time to cross, then we could also draw some different conclusions. But we don't, so we would say that these Beatles, at least in this photo, are showing their societal conformity, their conventional morality here. The societal conformity stage also involves a feeling of responsibility towards the welfares of others in society. So this is when we start to make sacrifices for others that may not even be known to us. We start to make sacrifices for the social good. Waiting in line, even if it's a really long line and you're starving to get your lunch, is an example of societal conformity. Now, not only do we fear the maybe punishment or the negative sanctions we might receive from others in the line, we also know that if everyone were to stop waiting in line for their lunch, that we would quickly kind of devolve into a chaotic situation where no one would be able to, order their lunch, and maybe restaurants wouldn't be able to operate. So this is a kind of stage of moral reasoning that is really important for societies to promote to their citizens and is important for individuals to be able to attain because it results in greater social stability. So this is really, maybe to connect with Durkheim's idea of the collective conscience, this is a powerful kind of aspect of the collective conscience, those shared sets of ideas that bind people together. Okay, so within stage four, a few more ideas need to be covered. So, as I mentioned previously, this is where individuals start to engage in moral behavior in order to kind of preserve the greater social order. and to promote the well-being of others. In this case, morality is is a kind of phenomenon that is related to maintaining the social order for its own sake. So when we're in traffic on the freeway, uh, well, not a whole lot of traffic currently, considering the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis. But when the traffic does return, many of us will kind of be forced to, sit and endure it, as opposed to maybe driving over on the shoulder and passing everyone and saying, to hell with you all. I'm getting to where I need to go. We wait in traffic because we know that it's against the law to maybe circumvent that. But we also know that you have to make some sacrifice in order to have social stability and social order. Anyone who's been to a place where traffic laws are not obeyed knows that these can be quite chaotic situations, and there isn't a lot of order, at least in terms of traffic. So, this is a stage of moral reasoning that is very kind of deeply interconnected, I should say, with social order and social stability. So to use the stealing example, this is where we would start to take into account social order, social stability when making decisions. So, this is where an individual might say the motives for stealing could be good. Maybe someone needs to feed their family. But stealing is wrong, and it's a threat to social order. So if everyone is going to steal to feed their family, then this is going to result in a breakdown in social order and is undesirable, at least within this kind of framework of moral reasoning. Now, this doesn't mean that an individual with this type of morality wouldn't, steal is essentially to feed their family. Folks do all sorts of things when they're desperate and they need to survive. But this, these kind of questions would be asked, and we might then start to see, instead of actually going out and stealing to feed a family, we might see someone wanting to put pressure on social institutions, to provide better for people who might be struggling to feed their families. So this is where you might start to see calls for expanded social welfare programs, more robust social safety net, and these types of things. Getting back to the point on retribution, so within level 1, retribution happens at the individual level. Revenge is permissible. Within level 2, stage 3 and 4, retribution happens collectively. So retribution at the individual level is discouraged, is considered immoral. Revenge is considered immoral. Retribution should be administered collectively, and this should probably happen through appropriate social institutions like the justice system. So the civil and criminal justice system would be the tool that might be relied upon here. Now, of course, justice systems vary from society to society, and that is not necessarily appropriate here. But what is appropriate is that individuals aren't going out and seeking their own kind of justice and their own retribution, but that is happening at the collective level. Okay, so now moving forward to our final level of moral reasoning, which is called post-conventional morality. And we're going to start with stage 5 within post-conventional morality, which is called the social contract and individual rights. And within this stage of moral reasoning, a stable, cohesive, efficient, well-functioning society may not always be a good one. This is a stage of moral reasoning where individuals begin to develop ideas of morality that could be detached from society's definition of what is morally right and morally wrong. They could conflict with societal definitions, and this is where kind of universal ideas of morality start to percolate, start to develop. So in this stage of moral reasoning, individuals begin to identify rights that and values that a society should have. So, for example, basic human rights would be a focus here. Guaranteeing citizens of a given society life, liberty, security. We might even go a little bit further and start talking about equality, freedom, these types of things. This could be a stage of moral reasoning that individuals attain, where they start to believe that societies should be responding to their citizens, and that that people, citizens of a given society or community, should have a say in establishing the kind of norms around morality, what is right and wrong. So this could be done through democratic processes, individuals participating in the voting process, in the political process, in order to change unfair rules, to put pressure on political representatives, to change systems that are considered unjust. And so I have a picture here of Black Lives Matter protester. Black Lives Matter has been a kind of ongoing protest movement, since mid 2015 with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And of course, Michael Brown was not the first African American male to experience violence at the hands of the police and the criminal justice system. And of course, some would say that maybe we could even look back at Trayvon Martin in 2013, the Trayvon Martin case, as a catalyst for Black Lives Matter as well. But this is, something that is unfortunately well documented throughout the American experience. For instance, the period after the Civil War, sometimes called Reconstruction, was one of the most violent periods in American history, and Black and brown folks lost their lives at unprecedented levels. Thousands of public lynchings occurred during this period. So protesting racial injustice in America is not a new phenomenon. Black Lives Matter is probably an extension of previous civil rights-oriented protests and activist movements. But Black Lives Matter, I think, is a movement that embodies a certain definition of morality and is attempting to hold society to its standard of what's morally just and right as defined by members of that group, who of course kind of share maybe social environments and social contexts to some degree. So many protest movements, say the women's liberation movement, LGBTQIA plus movements, many other kind of activist movements around the world are probably occupying the stage of moral reasoning, according to Kohlberg, trying to promote values that actually conflict with the values that society embodies. Okay, so just to go a little bit further here with stage 5, after identifying those criteria, so maybe Black Lives Matter has identified a few criteria that society should embody. Those might include racial equality, equal opportunity for all, regardless of the color of their skin, an elimination of systemic discrimination and bias, say in the political system, in the criminal justice system, in education, media, and in many other social institutions that are characterized by those phenomena. That once those criteria are identified, society should be evaluated, and if the evaluation is showing that the societies are not matching up to the identified criteria, then you may need to put pressure, right, in order to make social change that reflects those identified criteria. So just to kind of deviate from those previous points, going back to the stealing example, in this conception, stealing to feed oneself is justifiable, regardless of whether it's going to result in a kind of reduction in social stability or social cohesion, because life is always more important than property. This is having to do with that focus on kind of basic human rights and universal understanding of morality. In this conception, morality and rights may take priority over the law. So, as I mentioned previously, this activist movements that violate the law are going to be maybe described by this stage of moral reasoning pretty well. So if we looked at, say, civil rights protesters in the 1960s, in many cases, especially in the South, they were going out and violating anti-protest laws. They were jailed for organizing people to go out and vote. There were kind of many legal violations that were occurring, but of course those legal violations were tolerated by members of the movement, and in some cases they were even promoted as a kind of strategy to display the absurdity of the laws themselves, these kind of racial codes and post-Jim Crow laws that existed in the 1950s and 60s in the American South. So in that case, morality took precedence over the law, and these law violations were weighed against the social contract. These law violations were considered necessary in order to achieve positive social change.